Every day, you and I get bombarded with negative news. And just like our bodies becomes what we eat, our minds become the information that we consume. If you want to stay positive, it's so important that you also listen to stories that inspires you and uplifts you. In this podcast, we interview world-leading experts dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems. And if you stick around, I promise you will not only be as informed as if you watch the news, you will feel uplifted, inspired, and have more positive energy in your life. Welcome to Great.com Talks with. Hi and welcome. Today Great.com talks with Emily Norton, who is the Executive Director of the River Watershed Association. And if you haven't heard of them before, they're an organization that protect and restore the Charles River in Boston and its watershed lands. And if you're new here into this podcast, you definitely want to press subscribe, either on YouTube or in your podcast app, because today we're going to talk and learn about a remarkable success story. So, Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Great.com today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
So how would you describe your organization to someone that is not familiar with either the work that you do or the problems that the Charles River are and have been facing?
Sure. So the Charles River is the major river in the greater Boston area. It winds its way from Hopkinton to Boston, and folks may remember the name Hopkinton. Anyone who is familiar with the Boston Marathon, the Boston Marathon also begins in Hopkinton and winds its way into Boston. And like many urban rivers around the country and the world, the Charles River was pretty polluted from 400 years of industry and dams, and really just treating it literally in many cases as a dump. Many areas along the river were literally used as municipal dumps, trash, all kinds of pollutants, industry waste. You had a dye factory that would literally turn the river pink periodically. You had slaughterhouses with the offal from the discarded animal parts. I mean, it was really, really disgusting. And then a lot of raw sewage used to be discharged into the Charles River. And that was not unusual. And unfortunately, in Massachusetts, there are still rivers that have billions of gallons of raw sewage being discharged. And if you look at the history, for decades, leaders in this area literally had given up on the Charles. There are reports where they say, nope, it's impossible. It will never be cleaned. And our organization was founded in 1965 by residents who cared about the Charles and wanted to see it cleaned up. And I think it's an inspiring story because it shows that when we put our minds together and bring all of our resources to bear, including legal resources and financial resources, we can actually make a difference. So in our case, what happened with the Charles is there were lawsuits. We had to build a new treatment facility. We had to separate stormwater from sewage pipes. So this was literally close to $5 billion of investment. But now, and just to give you, I grew up in this area. I actually live in the house I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. So I remember, I'm in my 50s. I remember standing next to the Boston Harbor, standing next to the Charles, and it smelled like sewage. It was disgusting. And so the idea that you would want to have a home or a business near these waterways was ludicrous. And now for those who visit Boston or live in Boston or know about the head of the Charles or know about all the development in the seaport, it's a very desirable place to be, to run along it, to bike along it, to kayak in it. And it's because of all these investments over the years. Now our work is a little bit different. We haven't eliminated all the sewage discharges, especially after heavy rains. There are some more what are called combined sewer outfalls, that combined sewer overflows after storms. But it's much less than it used to be. It's a tiny, tiny fraction. We've literally reduced that sewage by over 95%. Now the biggest challenges to the Charles River are stormwater runoff. So if you look at your roads, your buildings, your sidewalks, every time rain falls on those, on asphalt, The rain is carried into a storm drain, and that discharges directly into a water body, usually without any treatment at all. So whatever gross stuff is on your roads, the drips from the gasoline, fertilizer, trash, whatever, is carried directly into your waterways. So what we need to be doing is investing in what's called green infrastructure, where you have bioswales and rain gardens and permeable pavers and things that will capture the water first, let it be drawn into the soil, infiltrate into the soil where it's actually cleansed naturally by soil on its way to the groundwater, then on its way into the river. It's, we have a lot of paved areas in our cities and towns. So this is a big job. We don't have to capture all of the water, but we have to be capturing a lot more than we are now. So it's really thinking differently about when we build buildings or redo our roads or redo our sidewalks. How can we be building in these natural features so that we can even further clean up our waterways, not just the Charles, but really any waterway near you. This is being affected this way.
So it really sounds like you are not only cleaning up one river, but you are setting an example that other cities can learn from. And I really like the word you mentioned on your website, that you want to create blue cities. And
yes. Yeah, so the idea there is that before Europeans came to New England, it was very watery. It's actually really interesting for those who know Massachusetts, and this may be the case in other areas, but I only know Massachusetts. If you look at the names of a lot of our towns, Swampscott, Waterbury, Watertown, Marshfield, there's actually water words in the names of our towns because of how watery this area was. And when Europeans came and we started developing the area, we bulldozed streams, covered them up, culverted them, and that allowed us to have the modern lives that we have, roads and buildings and towns. But we redirected the water, and that worked for a while. But what's happening now with climate change in the Northeast part of the United States, our national climate assessment and our climate science is showing that we are going to be seeing increasing precipitation events, and not just over the course of the year, but also over the course of a day or 2 days. We're getting much more rain than we used to in that period of time. And our stormwater system is not built for that. So we are already seeing increasing amounts of flooding. So not just the flooding next to the coasts that people think of from sea level rise and storm surges, but even simply from rain. So this is something that is this looming problem for even inland communities. Folks may remember Hurricane Irene heavily damaged the state of Vermont. Vermont is nowhere near the ocean, and it was simply the rain. So that's another big part of what we do, is when we talk about making investments to have more blue cities, it's about how do we restore the natural hydrology that existed while still maintaining our modern lives, but how do we manage water differently so that more of it is being captured, infiltrated into the ground, so that we can not only improve the water quality of the Charles River, but also protect people and property from flooding.
that sounds really interesting. So help me understand then. I mean, Stockholm, where I'm from, is also a city with a lot of rivers and a lot of water. How do you envision a future city looking like that has a healthy water system?
So it wouldn't necessarily have to look too differently, but instead of, so when you have sort of your sidewalk berm, you've got your grass next to your sidewalk, when you see these green infrastructure installations, you have a depression. So because you want the water to actually go into those green areas, you have natural plantings that are designed for your climate to be able to withstand, being next to a road, but also are more likely to be able to draw in water. You have, in some cases, special soils that are better at holding in water and cleansing water. So you have these installations that really bring more nature into an urban environment, but are also actually acting as flood retention and water quality purifiers. Even just more trees. You're probably aware, I'm sure there have been instances like this in Europe. I'm more familiar with things that happen in the United States, the heat wave in 1995 in Chicago that killed thousands of people. Another impact from climate change is these increased storms. And especially in the Northeast or the northern parts of the United States, a lot of homes never had air conditioning because we didn't need it. Our summers weren't that hot. When I was a kid in Massachusetts, we didn't routinely have 90-degree days in the summer. Now we do, more and more every year, and the climate projections that they're going to be even more in coming years. So if you don't have air conditioning and the heat gets to 90 or 100 degrees and you don't have any trees around, there's a huge difference in the heat. It's called the heat island effect. When you have heavily asphalted areas, particularly at night, you can see a difference of over 20 degrees Fahrenheit. I know you're probably a Celsius person,
Wow.
and I'm not, but someone will have to do some math on that. So even if you have power, even if you have, even if you have air conditioning, if you lose power in a storm, this is literally a life and death situation where people are going to die from heat stroke. So this is the kind of thing, but if you can bring more trees into your built environment, into your urban areas, those cool the air, they clean the air, they hold in water and protect from flooding. So we have these amazing tools in trees that we need to be deploying a lot more.
And both trees and river must have a positive psychological effect for the people living in the cities as well.
Yeah, I think we don't need to explain that to anyone or show any data to anyone during this pandemic, the incredible value and mental health benefits of having access to nature. But that was always the case, and we've all experienced it the past year.
Yeah, and I think people really are getting reminded. So what's interesting in your case then is that you had this massive problem with the Charles River. Now you have started to get closer and closer to solving it while still having some way to go. Do you envision for your organization that when you're done with the Charles River, you're kind of, okay, we're done? Or do you think maybe you will take the knowledge and the research and the skills of advocacy that you have picked up here and move them to other areas, maybe in the US or in other countries that might be needing the same kind of cleansing?
So it would be a wonderful problem to have, to be done with our work with the Charles River.
I'm naive.
Yeah, these solutions we're talking about are going to be over the course of many, many years, because in many cases it's big investments, not just in these installations in our cities or how we develop, how we build new buildings, that we're holding more stormwater on site, but also it's a change in mentality. So the folks who build buildings, the folks who manage departments of public works, many times went to school many years ago. And so the things that they're being asked to do now are new, and that's going to take a while. So I often think when it comes to the environment that the technology is there, the knowledge is there, it's the political will and the, it's the political will and the mindset, I think, that we need to be doing things differently. And instead of taking the approach that we need to control nature, that's how we've developed, like, oh, there's a stream, we'll just bulldoze over it. Oh, we'll just put it in a culvert. We need to be working with nature. And these are often much more cost-effective approaches. There's a great success story that I tell in this area that I was very surprised at when I started at CRWA 2.5 years ago. So I'm, in addition to being the executive director at CRWA, I'm also a city councilor in my hometown. So you'd think I'd be super aware of things. In the 1950s, there were two hurricanes, Hurricane Connie and Hurricane Diane, and they caused massive flooding all over the eastern seaboard of the United States, including the Charles River watershed. And as a result, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and they were like, all right, we're going to put another dam on the Charles and levees and a lot of gray infrastructure installations at a cost of over $100 million. And instead, my predecessor by two, a woman named Rita Barron, took an Army colonel on a boat ride up the Charles, and upstream, they could see all of this undeveloped land that had been holding in floodwaters. And what they decided to do instead was the Army Corps spent a fraction of that amount just buying up land and preventing it from being developed. And if you drive around some of the more rural parts of the upper watershed area, you can see signs that say Charles River Natural Valley Storage Area. And it just looks like beautiful nature. It's not contiguous, but it's over 8,000 acres of wetlands. And they hold billions of gallons of rainwater. And they hold it and it slowly seeps into the Charles. And that decision made decades ago has been keeping lower Charles communities safer ever since, but none of us have ever heard of it. And so I like to tell that story because local officials in Boston or Cambridge or my city, we're not really ever even aware of development decisions that are made upstream, but that affects us downstream. So we need to be working more closely with one another. Massachusetts is not a state that has a very strong county system of government. We're very, very isolated in how we make decisions, but the water crosses municipal boundaries. The water does not respect municipal boundaries. So that's another sort of change in mindset that we have to have, is working more closely with one another on a regional or watershed basis. I didn't say this earlier, but a lot of folks may not even know what a watershed is. It basically means when the rain falls on that land, what body of water does it end up in? And so there are communities in the Charles River watershed where the river doesn't even run through it, like the town of Holliston doesn't even have the Charles in it, but decisions made in Holliston with land use and development affect the water quality in the Charles River.
It's so interesting. Someone that long ago had an understanding of what needed to be done, and that just one person made such a huge difference for generations to come. It's very inspiring. And it's
so that's
also
what we want to be doing now. We want to be making decisions now that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will look back and say, wow, what a relief that they made those decisions.
Yeah. And it's really a metaphor that we're kind of all in the same river with climate change as well, as a whole. And hopefully we can collectively make all those kinds of decisions. So if you imagine someone listening to this podcast then, because we're coming up towards the end, that someone is listening to this either in the Boston area or maybe somewhere across the globe, maybe in Stockholm where I am, that they want to do some kind of positive change, either for the Charles River or just to create a better environment in general. What action steps would you suggest that they make?
So I can't speak to the political system outside of the United States, but my guess is it's very similar. When you have active citizens or residents, I don't want to assume someone's a citizen, who reach out to local elected officials and say, I've been looking at these climate reports and here's what's coming to our area. What are you doing? What steps are you taking now to protect me? What steps are you taking now to protect my family or my business? Ask them those questions. And if they don't have the answer, offer to help them. I have gotten a lot accomplished, not because I'm so brilliant, but because people have stepped up to provide research or to give guidance or to connect me with people who know things. And we're all in this together. So the more that residents can step up and even help your political leaders know what to do and then prod them to keep doing it, that's going to be, and then give them credit once they've done it. We all love when people notice that we actually do good things and give us credit for it. Another point I do think it's important to make is that not everyone is affected by climate change equally. So the decisions made by all of us when it comes to the energy we use, how we manage water, and so on, affect all of us, but they affect those who are low income, who are elderly, people of color, more marginalized communities more. And so it's incumbent upon those of us who do have more power in society to step up and do even more. So I wanted to make sure I made that point.
Yeah, that seems fair, and a responsibility and a power I hope many of our listeners take. So Emily, thank you so much for speaking with Great today. It was a pleasure. I didn't know about the Charles River before I started researching, and it was great and satisfying for my curiosity to learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I hope you get to visit Boston. If you do,
I would
reach
love
out
to.
me. We'll take a walk along the Charles or go for a canoe.
I've only been to the West Coast. East Coast is my next US trip.
No, you got it.
I know. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And for you listening, if you enjoyed this episode, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that is showing the algorithms that this is an important conversation. So more people can learn both about the Charles River, but also how we can create bluer cities and a better environment for everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. What is great.com? That is the most common question that we get. And the shortest answer I can give you is that we are a company that is moving money from the online casino industry and donates it to charities that is helping the environment. The long answer, unfortunately, I don't have time to tell you today. But if you're curious, definitely Google what is great.com to learn more.